A millionaire brought in a mother and child at home after he found them at a bus stop on Christmas Eve. The next day, as they prepared to leave, he was shocked to find the rain hammered against the windshield, each drop splattering with the force of a dull ache. Seattle's streets, normally teeming with life, were deserted save for the occasional glow of headlights piercing the gloom. Donald Campbell gripped the steering wheel, his knuckles pale against the leather. His car glided smoothly over the rain-slick asphalt, but his mind churned with turbulence. He had no destination in mind. That had become the norm, driving without purpose, chasing an elusive solace that never came. Tonight, though, the city was quieter than usual. The world seemed to hum under the weight of Christmas, its lights twinkling against the dark like promises meant for others. Donald glanced at the colorful displays lining storefronts, but they only deepened the hollowness inside him. 7 years. 7 Christmases since the accident. 7 years of pouring himself into work, brick by brick, building an empire that had brought him everything except what he truly wanted. He could still see Olivia's laughter, warm and golden, lighting up the living room as she wrapped gifts. He could hear Matthew's giggles as they played beneath the tree. It was a cruel trick of memory, so vivid it felt real, yet untouchable. He shook his head and gently depressed the gas pedal, as though the pain in his chest could be overcome by speed. Wealth and success had polished the exterior of his life, but inside, Donald felt no different from the broken man he'd been when he buried them. Some scars never healed. They simply settled deeper, hidden beneath layers of distraction. A flicker of movement drew his attention to the sidewalk. He slowed as his headlights illuminated a small bus stop. Beneath the thin awning stood a woman, clutching a boy. Her coat was soaked, clinging to her frame, and the child's blanket was drenched, offering little protection against the biting wind. She glanced up, startled, as his car rolled to a stop. Donald's foot hesitated on the gas pedal. "What the hell am I doing?" he muttered, half to himself. But the car remained idle, engine idling softly against the backdrop of rain. Before he could second-guess the impulse, he turned on his hazard lights and rolled to the curb. The rain thundered against the roof of his car, an insistent rhythm that matched the unease in his chest. He had spent years perfecting the art of avoidance, of ignoring the world and its demands. But tonight, something rooted him in place. He rolled down the passenger window. Cold air and the smell of wet concrete rushed in. "Do you need a ride?" His voice came out steadier than he felt. The woman's face tightened. Her arms pulled the child closer. "We're fine," she said, though her shivering betrayed her words. Donald leaned forward, resting his hand on the wheel. "It doesn't look like it." He softened his tone, careful not to sound imposing. "You shouldn't be out here. Not in this weather." The child whimpered, a small, tired sound. The woman glanced down at him, her resolve visibly crumbling. Her eyes darted back to Donald, full of caution and exhaustion. "I don't know you," she said, her voice thin but firm. "That's fair," he replied. Reaching into his pocket, he pulled out his wallet and held it toward her, the glow of the dashboard light catching on his driver's license. "Donald Campbell, look, I'm not here to bother you, but this storm isn't letting up, and you both look like you could use somewhere warm." She studied him for what felt like an eternity, then sighed, her breath fogging in the night air. "All right." Her grip on the child tightened as she moved hesitantly toward the car. Donald unlocked the doors, and the woman helped the boy climb into the back seat before settling in beside him. The boy, no older than 3 or 4, nestled into her side, his wide eyes darting nervously around the unfamiliar car. Donald reached for the heating controls, cranking them up. "Thank you," she murmured, barely audible over the rain. Donald nodded, glancing at her through the rearview mirror. Her hair was plastered to her face, strands sticking to her cheek, The boy clutched a silver pendant hanging from his neck, the small charm catching the light. Donald's stomach clenched, but he forced his focus back to the road. "Where are you headed?" he asked, keeping his tone neutral. "Nowhere in particular," she admitted. "We missed the last bus." Donald didn't press further. The road stretched ahead, the rain relentless, and for the first time in years, the silence in his car felt less oppressive. As he drove toward his home, he found himself gripping the wheel less tightly. There was no clarity, no sudden epiphany, only a flicker of something unfamiliar, an urge to protect, to act. The storm raged outside, but within, something had shifted. The car's headlights swept up the winding driveway, revealing the silhouette of Donald's mansion. The rain blurred the grand facade, but the towering columns and wrought iron gates spoke of wealth and a history too tightly sealed to let anything escape. Sandra leaned forward slightly, her eyes scanning the enormous structure as the car stopped beneath a wide portico. Logan stirred in her lap, his small hands clutching the threadbare blanket as he glanced sleepily out the window. "You live here?" she asked, her voice soft but edged with disbelief. Donald glanced at her through the rearview mirror, catching the faint mix of awe and apprehension on her face. "Yes, it's just a place to sleep," he replied, his tone flat as if rehearsed. He stepped out first, opening an umbrella before moving to their side of the car. Sandra hesitated when he opened the door, cradling Logan tightly against the rain. "It's all right," Donald said, keeping his voice steady, though the sharp look from Sandra told him she wasn't yet convinced. They followed him to the front door, the storm battering the umbrella above them. Inside, the space opened into a vast foyer, polished marble floors gleaming under the dimmed chandelier. The air was cool, sterile, with a faint scent of wood polish that seemed more habit than home. Logan's sleepy eyes widened as he took in the grandeur. He squirmed in Sandra's arms, curiosity momentarily overriding his fatigue. "Whoa," he murmured, his voice barely more than a whisper. Donald caught the boy's awe and felt a pang, something both sharp and hollow, the sight of wide, innocent eyes, the unguarded wonder. "Here," Donald said, gesturing toward a sitting room to the left. The room was lined with towering bookshelves and heavy drapes that muted the outside storm. "It's warmer in here. I'll get some towels." Sandra nodded, her gaze lingering on the space as she stepped inside. She lowered Logan onto a couch far too large for him, tucking the blanket around him like armor. "Stay right there, okay?" she whispered, brushing damp hair from his forehead. "Okay," Logan mumbled, but his attention was already fixed on the tall shelves stacked with books, their spines gleaming gold and leather under the dim light. Donald returned moments later, a folded towel in one hand and a smaller one draped over his arm. "For you," he said, handing the larger towel to Sandra, then crouching slightly to hold out the smaller one to Logan. "Thanks," Sandra said quietly, avoiding his gaze as she wrapped the towel around her shoulders. Logan stared at Donald for a moment, then took the towel with a shy, "Thank you." Donald stood, his gaze lingering on Logan longer than he intended. The boy adjusted the towel, and in doing so, the silver necklace slipped into view from beneath the blanket. Donald's breath caught. The design was unmistakable. The delicate chain, the small charm engraved with initials he knew as well as his own. He'd picked it out for Matthew's 3rd birthday, just weeks before the accident. His chest tightened, a wave of grief rising unbidden. He clenched his jaw, forcing himself to stay composed. "Do you want tea? Coffee?" Donald's voice came out too quickly, the words rushed and slightly clipped. Sandra blinked at him, startled by the sudden shift. "Tea would be nice," she said finally. Donald nodded, and left the room, his footsteps measured but brisk. Sandra sat down beside Logan, drying his hair gently with the towel. She glanced at him, then around the room again, the opulence now feeling more like a weight pressing down than a comfort. "Are we going to stay here?" Logan asked, his voice small. "For tonight," Sandra replied softly. "I like it," he said, his eyes still darting to the books and the unfamiliar grandeur surrounding him. A shadow passed by the doorway, and Sandra glanced up to see an older woman standing there, her posture rigid, her expression tight with something unreadable. "Mrs. Harper," the woman said curtly, as if the name were both a title and a statement of authority. "I wasn't informed we'd be having guests." Sandra rose slightly, unsure whether to introduce herself or apologize. "It's just for tonight," Donald's voice cut through as he returned, holding a tray with 2 steaming cups. He met Mrs. Harper's gaze, his tone firm but nonchalant. "They needed a place out of the rain." Mrs. Harper's lips pressed into a thin line. "Of course," she said, though her eyes lingered on Sandra, flicking to Logan for just a second longer than necessary. Donald set the tray down and handed a cup to Sandra. "I'll have the guest rooms prepared," he said, his voice softer now, almost distracted. "Thank you," Sandra said, though her tone was tinged with uncertainty. Mrs. Harper left without another word, her footsteps echoing faintly down the hall. Donald glanced at the doorway, then back at Sandra and Logan. "It's a big house," he said, almost apologetically. "She runs it like a ship." Sandra nodded, unsure how to respond. Logan reached for the tea, but she gently pulled it back. "Too hot, sweetheart." Donald watched them, his mind swirling. The necklace gleamed faintly under the light, and he couldn't shake the thought that had lodged itself in his chest. Morning crept into the mansion slowly, its light muted by heavy curtains that allowed only slivers of pale gold to cut through. Sandra woke with a start in the modest guest room Donald had prepared. The silence of the house was oppressive, as though even the walls refused to acknowledge her presence. After checking on Logan, still soundly asleep in the adjacent room, she tiptoed down the wide hallway, the soft tap of her footsteps swallowed by the plush carpeting. She found herself drawn toward the faint sounds of clinking dishes and low voices. Entering the dining room, she saw Donald seated at the far end of a long table, sipping coffee and reading something on his phone. The faint aroma of toast and eggs filled the room. Mrs. Harper was at the sideboard, arranging platters with precise movements, her back straight as a board. "Good morning," Sandra ventured, her voice hesitant but polite. Donald looked up, a small nod acknowledging her. Mrs. Harper turned briefly, her lips pressing into a tight smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Good morning," Harper said tersely. Her tone was clipped, professional, and just cold enough to imply judgment. "I hope you don't mind," Sandra continued, stepping further into the room. I'm an early riser, and I thought I'd check on Logan before he woke up hungry." Donald gestured to the seat across from him. "You're welcome to join. Harper's already made enough to feed an army." Sandra sat cautiously, acutely aware of Harper's gaze sweeping over her. "Thank you. This is very kind." As she reached for the cup of tea that Harper placed in front of her, she breathed in and decided to break the tension. "I don't think I properly introduced myself last night," Sandra said, glancing between Donald and Harper. "I'm Sandra. I'm a teacher, 2nd and 3rd grade mostly, and that little ball of energy is Logan." Harper's eyes flickered, her expression impassive. Donald, however, leaned forward slightly, his interest piqued. "A teacher?" Sandra nodded, a small smile touching her lips. "Yes, it's rewarding work, though it doesn't quite prepare you for sleepless nights with a 7-year-old who decides he doesn't want to finish his math homework." Donald's lips tugged into the faintest smile. Sounds lively. It is, Sandra said, glancing at the room around her. Your house, though. It's so quiet. I was surprised to see no sign of Christmas. I thought every home had at least a tree this time of year. Donald's expression tightened slightly. Christmas hasn't been much of a priority in a while. The silence that followed was heavy, but Sandra didn't press further. She comprehended that this man possessed layers he wasn't prepared to reveal just yet. Logan's small footsteps pattered down the hallway, breaking the tension. He appeared in the doorway, his hair tousled, his eyes blinking sleepily. "Morning," he mumbled, padding over to Sandra. "Good morning, sleepyhead," she said, pulling him close and smoothing his hair. Harper's gaze softened briefly as it settled on Logan, but her guard snapped back into place when she noticed Sandra looking. Later that day, as Logan wandered through the sitting room, exploring the vast shelves of books, Sandra found herself alone near the study. The door, slightly ajar, revealed rows of shelves, framed photographs, and what looked like journals or notebooks lined neatly along a desk. Her curiosity overcame her. She stepped inside cautiously, her fingers brushing the spines of books carefully arranged in alphabetical order. One stood out, a collection of poetry, its worn cover suggesting it had been well loved. She opened it, her gaze falling on the inscription on the first page. To Olivia, whose love makes every word come alive. Forever yours, Donald. The ache in the words struck Sandra deeply. She turned the pages slowly, absorbed in the life they hinted at, until a sharp voice broke her reverie. "What are you doing in here?" Sandra spun, the book nearly slipping from her hands. Harper stood in the doorway, her arms crossed, her eyes sharp and accusatory. I didn't mean to intrude," Sandra stammered. "I was just—" "This isn't your space," Harper snapped, stepping into the room. "Olivia's memory deserves more respect than being poured through by a stranger." Sandra's cheeks flushed. "I wasn't pouring through anything, I was curious." "And that's exactly the problem," Harper said coldly. "You've been here for less than a day, and you're already trying to worm your way into places you don't belong." Sandra's jaw tightened, her initial embarrassment giving way to frustration. "I'm not trying to replace anyone," she said quietly, but firmly. "I have no agenda here. I just want to take care of Logan." "What's going on?" Donald's voice cut through the tension. Both women turned to see him standing in the doorway, his gaze sweeping the room before landing on Harper. "Nothing," Harper said, her tone losing some of its sharpness. "I was just reminding Miss Sandra of boundaries." Donald's brow furrowed. "Sandra's a guest in my home. She doesn't need a lecture on boundaries." Harper's lips thinned, but she said nothing more. She gave Sandra one last glance before walking out. Donald stepped further into the room, his eyes softening slightly. "She means well. She's just protective of this house and Olivia's memory." Sandra's voice wavered as she replied, "I understand. I didn't mean any harm." "I know," Donald said. "And, for what it's worth, Logan is lucky to have someone as devoted as you." Sandra nodded, a small, grateful smile breaking through the tension. Donald lingered a moment longer, his gaze falling briefly on the book she still held before he left, leaving Sandra alone with the quiet weight of the room. The morning light filtered through the tall windows, casting muted shadows across the breakfast table. Sandra carefully sliced a piece of toast for Logan while he fidgeted in his chair, his eyes darting between the plate of scrambled eggs and the large glass vase on the table that held no flowers. "Eat your eggs, Logan," she said, though her voice was softer than usual. "Yes, Miss Sandra," Logan mumbled with a playful grin, earning a slight shake of her head. Donald sat at the far end of the table, his coffee untouched as he scanned the news on his phone. Harper moved in and out of the room, silently, her presence an ever-watchful shadow. "I think we should head home after breakfast," Sandra said carefully, breaking the stillness. Donald's gaze lifted. "You're welcome to stay longer," he offered, though his tone was casual. Sandra shook her head gently. "Thank you, but I don't want to impose. Besides, Logan has been looking forward to his school project next week." "What is it?" Donald asked, his eyes flicking briefly to Logan, who perked up. "We're building dioramas of famous places," Logan said excitedly. "I picked the Space Needle." Donald smiled faintly. "That's ambitious." Logan shrugged proudly. "Miss Sandra says I can do anything if I try hard enough." "She's right," Donald replied, though his gaze lingered on Logan a second too long. When breakfast was done, Sandra gathered their things, tucking Logan's small belongings into her worn satchel. Logan wandered into the sitting room, drawn to the towering bookshelves again. "Logan, come here. Let's say goodbye properly," Sandra called. Logan skipped back into the foyer, his excitement palpable, even as he adjusted the silver necklace that had slipped out from under his shirt. Donald knelt slightly, his hands braced on his knees, and gave the boy a small smile. "You take care of yourself, all right?" "Yes, sir," Logan said brightly. As Logan adjusted the necklace again, the charm caught the light. Donald froze, his gaze zeroing in on the delicate silver chain and the engraved charm, MJC, his initials. A wave of emotion surged through Donald so fast it left him unsteady. His breath hitched as memories came flooding back, the small box wrapped in red paper, the way Matthew's face had lit up when he opened it, the feel of his tiny hands wrapping around Donald's neck as he thanked him. "Where did you get that?" The words tumbled out before Donald could stop them, his voice sharper than intended. Logan blinked, startled by the sudden change in tone. "It's mine," he said, shrinking back slightly. Sandra stepped forward quickly, her brow furrowed. "What's wrong?" Donald straightened, his face a careful mask now. "Nothing. It looks familiar." Sandra's gaze shifted between Donald and the necklace. "He's had it since I found him," she said cautiously. "It was the only thing he had with him besides a blanket." Donald nodded slowly, his mind spinning. "It's a nice piece," he said evenly, though his hands had tightened into fists at his sides. Sandra sensed the tension, but didn't press. "Logan, say thank you to Mr. Campbell," she prompted, her voice firm but kind. "Thank you, Mr. Campbell," Logan said obediently, though his curiosity about Donald's reaction lingered in his wide eyes. "You're welcome," Donald replied, his voice quieter now. When the door closed behind them, Donald leaned heavily against the wall. His mind raced with possibilities, each more impossible than the last. The necklace wasn't just familiar. It was his son's. The boy wearing it couldn't be anyone else's child. He strode to his office and picked up his phone, his hands shaking slightly as he dialed. "Morgan," he said when the line connected, "I need you to look into something for me." "Of course," the investigator replied smoothly. "What's the case?" Donald hesitated, his throat tight. "There's a boy, 8 years old, lives in a small town outside Seattle. I need to know everything about him, where he came from, who he's been with, everything." "Understood," Morgan said, the sound of typing already audible in the background. "What's his name?" "Logan," Donald said softly, the name unfamiliar, yet heavy on his tongue. As he hung up, Donald sank into his chair, staring out the rain-streaked window. The possibility that Logan might be Matthew was overwhelming, and yet it seemed impossible not to believe. That evening, as the hours dragged on, Sandra noticed the change in Donald's demeanor. His warmth from earlier was gone, replaced by a distracted air that felt almost distant. "Did I do something wrong?" she asked Harper, tentatively, as they prepared to leave. Harper gave her a sideways glance. Mr. Campbell keeps his thoughts to himself. Best not to overthink it. But Sandra couldn't shake the feeling that something had shifted. Donald's sudden coolness left her uneasy, and as the car disappeared down the driveway, she couldn't help but glance at Logan, still clutching the necklace. "Let's get home," she murmured, more to herself than to him. But her voice betrayed a flicker of doubt that even Logan noticed. The rain outside Donald's office was relentless, drumming against the windows as though mirroring his unease. He stared at the framed photo on his desk, a family portrait taken on Matthew's 3rd birthday. Olivia's smile was radiant, Matthew beaming as he held the small box containing his new silver necklace. Now that same necklace was worn by a boy Donald barely knew, but couldn't stop thinking about. The phone on his desk vibrated, breaking the silence. He snatched it up immediately. "Campbell," Morgan's voice came through, efficient and direct. "I've got the basics. Logan was found outside a church in Portland when he was around 3 years old. No one left a note, but he had a blanket and that necklace. Sandra adopted him from the foster system about 2 years later. She's clean. Teacher, no criminal record, no red flags." "And the church?" Donald pressed, leaning forward in his chair. "I'm looking into it." "The timeline matches, though. If the boy really is who you think he is, Olivia would have had time to get him to safety before the accident." Donald's hand tightened on the receiver. "I need more, Morgan. Keep digging." "I'll contact the church directly. Give me a day or two," Morgan assured him. "Make it quick," Donald said, his voice colder than he intended. Across town, in the modest warmth of her small home, Sandra couldn't shake the unease that had settled in her chest since leaving Donald's mansion. Logan sat cross-legged on the floor, his focus entirely on a puzzle they'd been working on together. "Almost done, Logan," Sandra said, trying to keep her voice light as she handed him the final piece. He grinned, fitting it into place with a triumphant flourish. "See? I told you we'd finish." Sandra smiled faintly, running a hand over his hair. "You're right. We always do." But her mind was elsewhere. Donald's sudden shift in demeanor replayed in her thoughts. What had triggered it? "Miss Sandra?" Logan asked, his voice curious. She snapped out of her reverie. "Yes, sweetheart." "Do you think Mr. Campbell liked us?" he asked, tilting his head. Sandra hesitated. "I think he was very kind to let us stay," she said carefully. "But he got quiet," Logan said, frowning. "Did I do something wrong?" No, Sandra reassured him quickly, pulling him into a hug. "You didn't do anything wrong. Sometimes grown-ups just have things on their minds." Logan nodded, but didn't look entirely convinced. The next day, Donald's phone rang as he sat in his study. It was Morgan again. "I've got more," Morgan began. "The church in Portland. There was a volunteer there, David, who claims he remembers a woman dropping off a little boy around that time. She was frantic, said she couldn't stay but begged him to keep the boy safe. The description he gave fits Olivia." Donald's mind raced. The image of Olivia, desperate, terrified, yet somehow thinking clearly enough to protect their son, burned vividly in his mind. Donald's throat tightened. Did he say anything else? She didn't give a name, but he remembered one detail. The boy was wearing a silver necklace, the same one Logan is wearing now. Donald's heart pounded in his chest. This wasn't just speculation anymore. "What about David?" Donald asked. "Where is he now?" "He's in the city, working an office job, living a quiet life, but he seemed hesitant when I reached out. He said he needed time to think before meeting with anyone connected to this." Donald exhaled heavily, leaning back in his chair. He couldn't blame the man for being cautious. Find him, Donald said firmly. Convince him if you have to. I need to know everything he knows. I'm on it, Morgan assured him before hanging up. Donald stared out the window for a long moment, watching the clouds shift and break apart, letting the faintest sliver of sunlight through. The restlessness inside him was unbearable. When Logan had stood in front of him that morning, adjusting the necklace Donald had once given Matthew, the boy's resemblance to his son had struck him like a physical blow. He thought of Sandra, how protective she was of Logan, how she'd selflessly taken in a boy who had nothing. His guilt twisted deeper, the weight of gratitude mingling with his longing to confirm the impossible. The sound of laughter broke through his thoughts. Donald rose and walked toward the source. From the window of the living room, he spotted Logan outside with a neighborhood boy, tossing a frisbee back and forth. Donald stood silently, watching Logan's carefree joy. The boy's laughter was light, unburdened. And yet, every motion, every smile, reminded Donald of the son he thought he'd lost forever. The necklace gleamed under the sunlight as Logan ran, the charm bouncing lightly against his chest. Donald swallowed hard. For the first time in years, hope felt like something tangible. But with that hope came fear. The fear that this connection could slip away as quickly as it had appeared. For now, he could only wait. Donald paced his study, the room cloaked in shadows as the evening rain continued its rhythmic drumming against the windows. Morgan's investigation into David was progressing, but the waiting gnawed at him. Each passing hour felt heavier, the weight of uncertainty pressing harder on his chest. Finally, unable to sit idle any longer, Donald decided he needed to act. He couldn't wait for David's confirmation. He needed to know Logan's truth for himself. Grabbing his phone, he called Morgan. I need Sandra's school address. She mentioned she's a teacher. Can you get it for me? Morgan, ever efficient, responded almost immediately. Already on it. Give me 10 minutes. True to his word, Morgan provided the address shortly after. Donald wasted no time, driving through the rain-slicked streets toward the elementary school. The building loomed ahead, quiet and dark under the weight of the holidays. A lone security guard emerged from a small booth near the entrance, waving Donald to a stop. School's closed for the holidays, the man said, his tone firm but polite. I'm looking for one of your teachers, Donald explained, lowering his window. Sandra, it's urgent. The guard hesitated, studying Donald's earnest expression. She's not here. Told us she'd be taking a break through the holidays. Donald's heart sank briefly before the man added, But she lives not far from here. Turn left at the main road, then take the second right. You'll find a small neighborhood there. Her house has a blue mailbox. Donald nodded, grateful. Thank you. As he drove away, his determination solidified. He was close now, closer than he'd been in years. Donald stood outside the small, single-story house, his heart pounding against his ribs. The neighborhood was quiet, the kind of place where bicycles lay forgotten on front lawns and porch lights flickered against the early evening sky. He hesitated, his hand hovering over the doorbell. Hope, guilt, and an overwhelming desire for answers had dominated the past few days. Now, with Morgan's findings confirming what he already suspected, Donald had one last step before the truth could fully reveal itself. The door opened after his second knock. Sandra stood there, her brow furrowed in mild surprise. Mr. Campbell, she asked, stepping onto the porch. Is everything all right? Donald nodded quickly, though his expression betrayed the turmoil brewing inside him. Sandra, I need to speak with you. It's about Logan. If you hear this and feel that Logan and Donald's fate is pitiful, please leave a comment, Teddy, to express your feelings. Her gaze sharpened instantly, a protective edge creeping into her stance. What about him? Donald's throat tightened, but he pressed on. This isn't easy to explain, but I believe Logan might be my son. Matthew. The words hung between them, suspended in the crisp evening air. Sandra's expression shifted from confusion to disbelief. Your son? I don't... She stopped herself, shaking her head. That doesn't make any sense. Logan has been with me since I adopted him. Donald took a step closer, his voice quieter now. The necklace he wears, the silver one with the initials. I gave it to my son for his 3rd birthday, just weeks before Olivia. Before the accident. Sandra blinked, her lips parting slightly, as if to protest, but her words didn't come. I've done some digging, Donald continued. The timeline fits. Olivia left Matthew at a church shortly before the accident, and Logan was found there around the same time. Please, Sandra, I just need to know for certain. Her hands trembled as she crossed her arms. And what exactly are you asking me to do? A DNA test, Donald said simply, his voice almost pleading. If I'm wrong, I'll walk away, and you'll never hear from me again. But if I'm right... He trailed off, unable to finish the thought. Sandra looked away, her jaw tight. You have to understand how this sounds. I've been his mother for years. Logan is everything to me. And I'm not trying to take him from you, Donald said, his tone firm but gentle. I'm grateful for everything you've done for him. But if he's my son, I deserve to know. He deserves to know. Sandra hesitated, then glanced back into the house where Logan's voice could be heard faintly, humming a tune. Finally, she nodded. All right. For Logan's sake. The days that followed were excruciating. Donald checked his phone obsessively, waiting for the results. Every moment felt stretched, each second weighed down by the possibility of either elation or heartbreak. When the email finally arrived, Donald's hand shook as he opened it. The words were simple, clinical, but they confirmed what his heart had been screaming since the moment he saw Logan's necklace. Match confirmed. For the first time in years, Donald allowed himself to feel the full weight of his emotions. Relief washed over him, followed quickly by guilt and an overwhelming joy he hadn't thought possible. He called Sandra immediately, asking if he could come over. She agreed, her tone cautious but kind. Sandra watched from the kitchen as Donald sat across from Logan at the small dining table. The boy chattered happily about his day, oblivious to the undercurrent of tension in the room. Donald listened intently, a faint smile on his face as Logan described the diorama he was building for school. The boy's enthusiasm was infectious, and for a moment, Donald felt the pain of the past ease under the warmth of Logan's presence. When Logan excused himself to grab his favorite book, Donald turned to Sandra. It's him, Donald said softly, his voice thick with emotion. Sandra nodded, her arms crossed tightly as she leaned against the counter. I knew when you showed me the necklace. I didn't want to believe it, but the way you look at him, the way he looks at you. Donald's gaze dropped to the table. I should have been there. For him, for Olivia. She saved him, and I didn't even know. Sandra crossed the room and sat across from him, her expression softening. You couldn't have known. And Logan, he's happy. He's safe. That's what Olivia would have wanted. Donald nodded, swallowing hard. I need to meet David, the man she entrusted him to. I need to know what happened that day. Sandra hesitated, but then placed a hand on his. Make gradual progress. Logan doesn't know yet, and you need to think about how you'll tell him. Donald met her eyes, gratitude shining through his grief. Thank you for everything, for taking care of him when I couldn't. Sandra smiled faintly. He's my son too, in a way. and he's lucky to have two people who care about him so much. As Logan's laughter echoed from the other room, Donald felt a renewed sense of purpose. The streets of Seattle shimmered under the glow of New Year's lights, their colors reflecting on rain-slicked pavements. Crowds gathered at street corners, wrapped in scarves and coats, their laughter and chatter blending with the occasional burst of fireworks in the distance. Donald barely noticed the festivities as he weaved through the city, his thoughts consumed by Morgan's phone call earlier that evening. "David's agreed to meet," Morgan had said, "tomorrow morning at a coffee shop downtown. He's hesitant, but he's willing to talk." Donald had thanked him gruffly, the weight of anticipation already settling in his chest. Donald waited at the small cafe, his coffee untouched. The space was quiet, save for the hum of low conversation and the soft clinking of cups against saucers. He glanced toward the door, his nerves taut as he anticipated the arrival of the man who held the missing piece to Olivia's final moments. When David finally walked in, Donald recognized him instantly from Morgan's description. A man in his early 30s, unassuming, with a demeanor that suggested he preferred to blend into the background. David hesitated briefly, his eyes scanning the room before landing on Donald. Donald stood and extended a hand. "David, thank you for coming." David nodded, his grip firm but reserved. "I wasn't sure if I should, but I guess I owe it to her." The two men sat across from each other, a heavy silence settling between them, before Donald spoke. "You were there when she brought Matthew to the church," Donald began, his voice low but steady. David nodded, his gaze fixed on his hands clasped on the table. "She came in the middle of the day. I was sorting donations when she burst through the door, carrying the boy. She was frantic, but focused. She didn't say much, just begged me to keep him safe. I remember the way she looked at me. It wasn't fear for herself. It was fear for him." Donald's throat tightened as he imagined Olivia's desperation. "Did she say who was after her?" "No," David admitted. "She only said they couldn't find him. She told me his name was Matthew and that she'd come back for him. But I knew she didn't think she'd make it." David paused, his voice breaking slightly. "She kissed him on the forehead, told him to be brave, and handed me a silver necklace. She said it was from his father. Then she ran out, looking over her shoulder like she expected someone to burst through the doors." Donald leaned back, the weight of David's words sinking into his chest. "And then?" "I didn't hear anything else until later," David said. "The news said a car had gone off the ravine nearby. When they showed her picture, I realized it was her." Donald swallowed hard, his mind replaying the image of Olivia's car tumbling into the ravine. The chaos of that day seared into his memory. They found her, but not Matthew. Everyone thought he'd drifted away in the river. David nodded solemnly. "I couldn't care for him on my own. I was just a college student then, barely scraping by. So I left him at the church with the priests and asked them to find him a good home. I've regretted that decision every day, but I thought it was the best I could do." Donald stared out the window, his jaw tight as the full gravity of Olivia's sacrifice settled over him. She had given everything to save Matthew, and for years, Donald had believed both of them were lost. "I failed her," Donald said finally, his voice a low rasp. "I wasn't there when they needed me." David shook his head. "She didn't blame you. She only talked about how much Matthew loved you. She wanted him to live, to have a chance at a future." Donald took a deep breath, his grief sharpening into determination. "I need to find the people who were after her. They took her from me and nearly took my son." David hesitated before nodding. "I hope you do. She deserves justice." Later that evening, Donald returned to Sandra's home, Logan greeted him at the door with an excited grin, a stack of books in his arms. "Mr. Campbell, look at all the new stories Miss Sandra got for me." Donald knelt to his level, his smile faint but genuine. "That's great, Logan. Which one's your favorite so far?" "The one about the brave knight," Logan said, his eyes lighting up. "He protects everyone and fights the bad guys." Donald's throat tightened at the unintended parallel. "That sounds like a good one." As Logan darted back into the living room, Donald stood and met Sandra's questioning gaze. "You saw him?" she asked. Donald nodded. David confirmed everything. Olivia saved him. She gave everything to make sure Matthew was safe. Sandra's eyes softened. "And now you know the truth. What will you do next?" Donald glanced toward Logan, who was engrossed in his book. "I'll approach it gradually. He's been through so much already. I won't overwhelm him." Sandra placed a hand on his arm. "He's happy, Donald, and he deserves to know how much he's loved by both of us." Donald nodded, his resolve strengthening. He had lost so much, but now he had a chance to rebuild. For Olivia's memory, for Logan, and for himself. Donald stood at the window of his study, staring out at the sprawling garden bathed in the pale winter light. Morgan's latest report lay open on his desk, its contents as damning as they were vindicating. The names of those responsible were there in black and white. A group of men led by Conrad Steele, a corrupt businessman Donald had exposed years ago. Steele's empire had crumbled under the weight of Donald's revelations, and his partners in crime had suffered similar fates. Their revenge had been as calculated as it was cruel, targeting Donald's family while he was away in Boston. Donald's jaw tightened as he recalled Morgan's findings. Olivia's car hadn't gone off the road by accident. Steele's men had orchestrated the pursuit that forced her off the ravine, believing they could erase Donald's legacy by destroying his family. They hadn't counted on Olivia's fierce determination to save Matthew. Now, with Morgan's evidence, Donald had the means to bring them all to justice. He picked up the phone and made the call that would begin the process of their downfall. The next day, Sandra arrived at Donald's mansion with Logan, holding his hand as they walked up the grand steps. She had hesitated about this visit, unsure of how Logan would process the growing bond between him and Donald. But the boy had been eager, his questions about Mr. Campbell multiplying since the truth had begun to surface. "Do you think he'll have my favorite cookies again?" Logan asked, his eyes bright with anticipation. Sandra chuckled softly. "We'll see, sweetheart. Remember to be polite, okay?" Logan nodded earnestly as Sandra rang the doorbell. Harper answered, her expression unreadable. Her gaze lingered on Sandra before shifting to Logan, who offered a shy smile. "Welcome back," Harper said, her tone carefully neutral. She stepped aside to let them in, but as Sandra passed, Harper's voice stopped her. "Miss Sandra?" Sandra turned, meeting Harper's steady gaze. "I owe you more than an apology," Harper said quietly. "You've done more for that boy than most could ever dream of. And you've given Mr. Campbell something he thought he'd lost forever. For that, I'm grateful." Sandra blinked, her throat tightening with unexpected emotion. "Thank you, Mrs. Harper. That means a lot." Harper nodded curtly before retreating to the kitchen, leaving Sandra and Logan to join Donald in the sitting room. Donald greeted them with a warmth that felt natural now, his stoic exterior softening as Logan ran to show him a drawing he had made of the kite they'd flown together. "Look! I made it colorful, just like the one we used!" Logan exclaimed, holding up the paper. Donald crouched to his level, studying the drawing with genuine admiration. "You've got an artist's eye, Logan. This is great." Logan beamed, and Sandra couldn't help but smile at the exchange. As Logan wandered off to explore the shelves of books he loved so much, Donald turned to Sandra. "Can I speak with you for a moment?" They moved to a quieter corner of the room, and Donald's expression grew serious. Morgan found them, the men responsible for Olivia's death. Sandra's breath hitched. "And?" "Conrad Steele and his associates," Donald said, his voice low but resolute. "They thought they could destroy me by taking my family. But now I have the evidence to bring them to justice. The process has already begun. They'll answer for what they've done." Sandra placed a hand on his arm, her eyes filled with empathy. "Olivia would be proud of you. She'd know you're doing this for her and for Matthew." Donald nodded, his gaze softening as he looked at her. "I couldn't have gotten here without you, Sandra. You saved my son when I couldn't. You gave him a life, a home, love. For that, I can never thank you enough." Sandra smiled, her voice quiet but firm. "You don't have to thank me. Logan is my family too. But I'm glad he has you now. He needs you just as much as you need him." Donald's expression conveyed his gratitude, and for the first time in years, the burden of guilt appeared to ease slightly. As the day unfolded, laughter filled the once quiet mansion. Logan's presence brought a lightness that seemed to infuse every corner of the house, and even Harper found herself smiling as she brought out a tray of cookies that just happened to include Logan's favorite. For Donald, it was a day of healing and closure. The steps he had taken toward justice marked a major victory, but it was the simple joy of being with Logan and Sandra that reminded him of what truly mattered. As Logan fell asleep on the couch, his small hand clutching the drawing he'd made, Donald and Sandra sat nearby, sharing a quiet moment. "This house feels different now," Donald said, his voice thoughtful. Sandra nodded. "Because it's not just a house anymore. It's a home." Donald smiled faintly, the warmth of her words sinking in. For the first time in years, he felt a sense of peace, knowing that together they were rebuilding what had been lost and forging something new. Donald leaned back in his chair, his office illuminated by the faint glow of his laptop screen. The evidence Morgan had uncovered was damning, laid out in detailed reports and grainy photos. Each document carried the weight of years of unanswered questions, leading to the same conclusion. Conrad Steele and his associates had masterminded the attack on Olivia. Morgan had traced the intricate web of connections, uncovering Steele's network of hired enforcers and his financial records. Donald stared at the damning evidence, a wire transfer to a known mercenary group just days before Olivia's death. The puzzle pieces fit perfectly, but the reality they painted was far from satisfying. Justice was finally within reach, but it would not undo the pain or the loss. It wouldn't bring Olivia back. The following morning, Donald sat with his attorney, preparing to initiate legal action. The plan was to go public. Steele's crimes would be exposed to the media, his reputation irreparably tarnished, and his co-conspirators implicated. "This evidence is airtight," his attorney said, sliding the last stack of documents across the desk. "Once this goes to the authorities, Steele's empire will crumble." Donald nodded, his jaw tight. "I don't want just a headline. I want them in court, facing every charge." The attorney met his determined gaze. "We'll make it happen." That afternoon, Sandra arrived at Donald's mansion with Logan in tow. Logan skipped up the steps, holding Sandra's hand as he excitedly recounted his day. Donald greeted them warmly at the door, his usual stoicism replaced with an ease that hadn't been there before. Logan darted into the sitting room, drawn to the bookshelves, while Donald and Sandra lingered in the foyer. "I wasn't sure if I should bring him today," Sandra admitted, her voice quiet. "I didn't know if you'd need space after everything." Donald shook his head. "Logan brings life to this house, Sandra, and right now, that's exactly what I need." Sandra smiled, the warmth of his words settling her lingering doubts. Later, as Logan played outside with a kite Harper had pulled from storage, Donald turned to Sandra. "Morgan found everything we needed. Steele and his men will finally pay for what they did." Sandra exhaled slowly, a mix of relief and sadness crossing her face. "It won't bring her back, but it's what Olivia would have wanted, for you to fight for justice for Matthew." Donald nodded, his voice thick with emotion. "Olivia's sacrifice saved our son. I owe her everything for that. But I owe you too, Sandra. You took in a boy with nothing and gave him a life filled with love. You protected him when I couldn't." Sandra placed a hand on his arm, her eyes earnest. "Logan is my family too. I didn't save him alone. He saved me too, in so many ways." Donald's gaze softened. "You're the reason he's the boy he is today. Thank you." As evening fell, laughter echoed through the halls of the mansion. Logan's innocence and joy seemed to chase away the lingering shadows, and even Harper found herself more at ease, smiling at the boy's endless energy. When Logan finally dozed off on the couch, clutching a book to his chest, Donald and Sandra sat quietly nearby. "This place feels different now," Donald said, his voice thoughtful. Sandra nodded. "It's becoming a home again." Donald looked at her, gratitude shining in his eyes. "And it's because of you." Together they watched Logan sleep, the quiet warmth of the moment, a promise of a better future. A future forged from pain, but filled with the hope of healing and love. The late afternoon sun filtered through the large windows of the sitting room, casting golden light across the shelves and the soft rug where Logan played with a puzzle. Donald sat across from him, leaning forward, his elbows resting on his knees. Sandra was nearby, watching quietly from a chair, sensing that Donald had something on his mind. "Logan," Donald began, his voice steady but gentle. The boy looked up, his curious eyes meeting Donald's. "Yes, Mr. Campbell?" Donald smiled faintly. "You know you can call me Donald, or something else if you'd like." Logan tilted his head, puzzled. "Like what?" Donald glanced briefly at Sandra, who gave him a nod of encouragement. Turning back to Logan, he spoke carefully. "I want to tell you a story about someone very special, someone who loved you more than anything in the world." Logan sat up straighter, intrigued. "Who?" Donald's voice softened. "Her name was Olivia. She was my wife. And your mother." Logan blinked, his small hands gripping the edges of the puzzle piece he held. "My mother?" "Yes," Donald said, his throat tightening. "Your real name is Matthew. When you were little, your mom did everything she could to keep you safe. There were bad people chasing her, and she made a very brave choice. She brought you somewhere safe and protected you, even though it meant she couldn't stay with you." Logan frowned slightly, processing the words. "Is that why I don't remember her?" Donald nodded. "She wanted you to be happy and safe, even if it meant you couldn't be with her." His voice faltered, but steadied as he continued. "You were my son, Matthew Campbell, and I've been looking for you ever since." Logan was silent for a moment, his wide eyes filled with wonder and uncertainty. "So, you're my dad?" Donald swallowed the lump in his throat and leaned closer. "Yes, Logan. I'm your dad, and I've missed you every single day." The boy's gaze darted to Sandra, searching for reassurance. Sandra knelt beside him, wrapping an arm around his shoulders. "What Mr. Campbell is saying is true, sweetheart. He's your dad, and he loves you very much, just like I do." Logan's brow furrowed as he thought hard. "But I love you too, Miss Sandra. Does that mean I can have two families?" Sandra smiled, her voice warm. "You don't have to choose, Logan. You already have two families who love you very much." Donald's chest tightened as Logan studied him carefully. Then, slowly, the boy stood and walked over to him. He stopped just short, his small hands hesitating before reaching out. "Can I call you Dad?" Logan asked softly. Donald felt his composure crack, tears stinging his eyes as he nodded. "I'd like that very much." Logan stepped closer, and Donald pulled him into a gentle embrace, holding him as though he might disappear. Later that evening, after Logan had gone to bed, Donald and Sandra sat in the quiet living room. The fireplace crackled softly, its warmth filling the space. Donald broke the silence first. "I was so afraid of this moment, of what he'd think, how he'd feel. But he's stronger than I gave him credit for." Sandra nodded. "He's resilient. He always has been." Donald leaned back in his chair, his expression thoughtful. "I've spent so many years running on anger and guilt. Now that he's here, I don't want him to feel any of that. I want him to feel safe, loved, and whole." "You're already giving him that," Sandra said gently, "just by being here." Donald looked at her, the weight of his gratitude clear in his eyes. "You've given him so much more than I could have imagined. You've been his anchor, his safe place. I don't know how I'll ever repay you." "You don't have to," Sandra replied softly. "Logan is our priority, and we're in this together." For a moment, they sat in companionable silence, the glow of the fire reflecting in their eyes. "I promise him a life filled with love and safety," Donald said quietly. "I promise I'll never let anything happen to him again." Sandra reached over, her hand resting lightly on his. "And I believe you." The weight of the past still lingered, but for the first time, it felt manageable, a burden they could carry together. As the fire crackled on, Donald felt a renewed sense of purpose, a future that now seemed brighter than he ever dared to hope. The morning of Logan's 10th birthday dawned crisp and bright, the winter sun casting a soft glow across the snow-dusted mansion. The house, once cold and silent, now buzzed with quiet anticipation. Sandra had been up early, decorating the dining room with streamers and balloons, while Donald worked in the kitchen with a determination that rivaled any professional chef's. "Dad!" Logan exclaimed as he wandered in, rubbing sleep from his eyes. His face lit up at the sight of the colorful decorations. "Wow! Did you do all this?" Donald knelt down, grinning. "Well, Miss Sandra helped, but I think I managed to make the pancakes on my own. Want to see if they're any good?" Logan nodded eagerly, running to the table where a stack of pancakes sat, topped with whipped cream and a single candle. "Make a wish, sweetheart," Sandra said, her voice warm. Before blowing out the candle, Logan squeezed his eyes shut, his little face scrunched in concentration. "Did you wish for something big?" Donald asked, his tone teasing. Logan giggled. "Maybe." Later that afternoon, the three of them piled into Donald's car, heading toward the city's entertainment district. Logan bounced with excitement in the back seat, chattering non-stop about the rides and games he wanted to try. "I've always wanted to go to the amusement park," Logan exclaimed, his breath fogging up the window as he stared at the skyline approaching. Donald glanced at Sandra, his heart swelling at the boy's unfiltered joy. "Well, today's your day, buddy. Let's make it unforgettable." The park was alive with laughter and vibrant colors, its towering Ferris wheels spinning lazily against the winter sky. Logan dragged Donald and Sandra from one attraction to the next, his energy seemingly endless. Donald found himself laughing more than he had in years, whether it was while competing against Logan in a ring toss game, or watching Sandra try and fail to win a giant stuffed bear from a claw machine. "Your turn, Dad," Logan said, handing Donald the joystick with an encouraging grin. After a moment of hesitation, Donald took a shot. To everyone's surprise, the claw gripped the bear firmly and deposited it into the prize chute. "Whoa, you did it!" Logan cheered, jumping up and down. Donald handed the bear to him, his smile wide. "I think this belongs to you." Logan hugged it tightly, his eyes sparkling. "Thanks, Dad." As night fell, the trio made their way to the park's central plaza, where crowds had gathered for the New Year's Eve fireworks display. Donald wrapped an arm around Logan's shoulders, pulling him close as the first fireworks burst into the sky, painting the night with vivid colors. Sandra stood beside them, her hand brushing against Donald's as they watched the display. The moment was simple, yet it carried a profound weight, a symbol of the journey they had taken to reach this point. Donald glanced down at Logan, whose face was alight with wonder. He leaned closer, his voice soft but resolute. "I don't think I've celebrated the new year yet, Logan. But tonight, I'm celebrating it with you. With us." Logan looked up at him, beaming. "Me too, Dad." Donald's gaze shifted to Sandra, whose smile mirrored his own. "And with you, Sandra. Thank you for everything." The three of them stood together as the final fireworks lit up the sky, their arms entwined in a quiet, unspoken promise. For the first time, the future felt full of hope, love, and healing. A new beginning for all of them. If this film touches your heart, leave your mark with a like, and don't forget to subscribe to our channel to explore more meaningful stories with us. Share your feelings with us and tell us your own stories. Every word you share is a building block that helps create our strong and enduring community. Together, we'll create a warm space where everyone can share and connect. Finally, don't miss the incredible stories coming your way soon. We're always here to bring you the best selections, full of deep values, yet entertaining. See you there.